There have been many combat games to come out in recent years. Each game comes with similarities, and once in a while we find a gem of a game, one that stands out from the crowd and introduces a mechanic and storyline that actually is much different from what we usually see. And today, that is why we want to actually talk about Sifu. Welcome everybody to the Patch Network, where we talk everything gaming and tech. Today we're asking the question, did you perhaps give up on Sifu too early? And why is it a game that really stands out among so many recent indie games that have come out in the past years? Beware, minor spoilers for the beginning parts of the game. The game was developed by Slowclap, and at the time of this recording, this is the second major release that the company has actually done. Sifu is one of the games that really set it apart in the indie space, and they created a combat game that was really fun and with a difficulty spike very similar to From Software games. But the cost of losing is slightly different. Where most games will punish you with a game over screen, or worse, just let you get back your experience points based on the last place that you died, something that gamers have started to get used to. But what Sifu does differently is that it actually ages your character up the more you lose. The more times you die, the higher the multiplayer goes up, meaning you end up aging faster to the game. The last time that this was actually done in gaming history is within Fable, where in Fable, your character will age up based off of the experience points that you have gained. This really added something to the storyline, which actually set it very much apart from how most games actually play. So let's get to the story. Sifu is a game that is based in a town in modern China, where you start the game on a stormy night and you raid the martial arts school, where you're able to defeat many enemies and with quite a bit of ease. You get the idea that you have stormed the school with a bunch of skilled fighters who are set to overthrow the Sifu. This starts the tutorial. The game starts in a standard fashion, where you've mastered the moves, the skills and all of the traits, and everything has been unlocked, and it shows you how strong you could potentially be once you have mastered every skill later on in the game. This is typical for most games to show you how fun the game can actually be. Except the person that you're playing as right now is not the future version of the protagonist, but is actually you, the main villain, who goes by the name of Yang. Yang, who's a former student of the Sifu, is out to attack the dojo to steal some precious artifact. But in the beginning, it isn't really clear what it is, but whatever it is, you can tell that it is a guarded treasure with immense power. How you can tell? It's basically how it's glowing, which pretty much is a standard symbol for I have immense power. Engaging in combat with the Sifu, Yang, currently played by you, is able to win when he beats the Sifu. You are treated to a cutscene. From there, that's when you realize this isn't really about you being Yang, but a little boy or girl, depending on who you choose, who just watched their father be killed by you, currently playing as Yang. Yikes. But as you crawl out the cupboard and you see the full group who has attacked your home, you kind of get the realization that these people are the people that you have to get revenge against. And this kicks off the storyline of you need to avenge your fallen father. The game is a combination of combat as well as some detective work, which encourages you to play the game over and over again. Not only to backtrack for missing information, but in order to see the parts of the map that you might have actually missed out, and also make the playthrough a little bit less stressful, depending on how you are able to progress through the game. There are some shortcuts which actually take you to the bosses a little bit quicker. So for now, let's put a bookmark on a video that we might create a little bit later on, essentially looking at how we can get to the boss fights in a quicker manner. The combat is pretty simple. You have the ability to attack and parry at the beginning of the game, as well as to block certain attacks, and it's typical of normal fighting games. Where the tricky part of it comes in is basically how you do your combos. in certain games, you'd basically click on up and an attack button, and you'd basically use the keypad. In this case, you are using the analog stick, which kind of feels a little bit different, especially if you come from games like Tekken and Street Fighter, where the movement is a little bit different, and using the analog sticks compared to the keypad kind of just makes it a little bit different. But with a lot more practice, and when you actually use like one of the attacks in combat, it makes it a little bit easier, and you start getting that little bit of muscle memory once you use an attack, and it makes your fighting a little bit more fluid. So in this game, getting good requires some level of defeat and some level of practice. Leveling up in the game requires you to actually get some good combat in, and while you actually get some combat in, you can level up at the various statues part of a level. In this case, once you actually get to the statues, you're able to update your structure, your health, your focus upgrades, resetting your age counter, and also leveling up a skill, depending on whichever one you actually want to select. The more you play the game, the more you level up, and you are actually able to add to your skill tree, which is a nice thing that as you go in between the levels, it's actually a skill tree that starts growing the more you actually get better at your martial arts. Now, leveling up actually happens not only at the statues, but also it allows you to get better at your skills the more you actually lose. But in this case, it's like saying that once you have lost, you've actually been able to gain a new skill, and you can actually use that in battle. The game does give you the ability to master all the skills, and how they get this right is you have to pour the XP that you've actually earned throughout the game 5 times into a particular skill. This allows you to unlock the skill permanently and doesn't reset every time you start the game. So this kind of makes the game a little bit more interesting the more you replay it. The difficulty of the game, while it is a beautiful indie game, it does have a very high difficulty spike, and if you used to Souls-like games, you'd know that you'd have to fight, die, get beaten up, fight again, upgrade your weapons, then die in the same spot that you've been dying for like the last week or so. The game is much shorter in terms of the locations and the vastness of the world, but what you lack in area, you gain in a lot of combat, and it's easy to spend hours in certain areas and try to beat the bosses and try to actually win a level, just staying as young as possible. Picking up the game in the beginning is really frustrating because the enemy patterns, the boss patterns are a bit of a challenge, but once you've actually mastered those by using simple dodge, parries, as well as other forms of attacks, you are able to actually memorize some of the attack patterns, and you get better with each playthrough and with each level. The game offers a few difficulty settings for casual gameplay, balanced one, and then if you really want to test your skills, a hardcore level where you actually get a challenge in terms of encountering your normal enemies and your boss fights. I have not tried the casual difficulty just yet, just to say that I've tried the hardest difficulty, and it really does change the strategy of how you actually fight with each enemy, where the more you get into the harder difficulty, the enemies change their moves ever so slightly by adding one more attack or one more dodge move to the way that they fight, and kind of just throws you off, especially if you spent tons of hours trying to memorize the attack patterns of most enemies and bosses. So while it does give you the same levels, same gameplay, and so on, it actually changes the way that you actually approach the whole game as a whole. Sifu actually has a very interesting mechanic in terms of how costly it is for you to lose within the game. Where some games you can lose as many times as you want to restart again, there is somewhat of a time limit that is added to you in game the more you lose. So, remember those talismans that we're talking about in the beginning of the game? Well, turns out that you as a player actually are holding one of these talismans. And essentially what this does is that it does give you a little level of immortality, but with a little bit of a twist and a little bit of a cost. Let me explain it for you. Basically, while you are in game and you are in battle and you lose, it will actually give you a revive, but it will give you 1 added year to your age. And if you lose again in a row, it will also add 2 years to your age. It will go on and on and on until eventually you become too old and you basically die. But the interesting thing is that you're able to reset this multiplier by defeating certain enemies in the game and resetting it all the way back to 0, which adds some level of complexity to the game, because now you want to stay as young as possible so that you can actually reach the end of the game. Because let's face it, you trying to stay as young as possible, because by the time that you actually get to young, I can guarantee the times that you will increase your multiplier, you are most likely going to die of old age, as opposed to being able to really win at a young level. But this is where the replayability of the game really comes in. What's most important to understand about this game is that how you actually win it is by really being patient with yourself. You need to be patient with yourself, be patient with the way that you actually level up, and replaying this game really comes in handy. So the more you replay it, the more you're able to level up, the more you're able to gain your skills, the more you're able to practice how to actually beat certain enemies, certain levels, and stay as young as possible. And the older you become a little bit stronger, but unfortunately you end up losing a little bit of health. So you really want to get to a point where you're actually starting the game from scratch sometimes, staying as young as possible in order to get to the end of the game. Sifu is really one of the brilliant games, and it requires you to get a lot of replay done so that you can actually beat it. I don't think it's that simple to beat it in your first playthrough, and the ultimate goal is to be able to perfect your fighting style and challenge yourself as much as possible to stay as young as possible. But the nice thing is that you actually get rewarded for either beating the game as young as possible or as old as possible. Overall, Slow Tap really delivered on a great challenging game, where it also treated you some breathtaking gameplay, and according to the latest releases of the game, they have changed a couple of things, where they've been able to add a couple of new skins, challenges, and modifiers to the game, like the ability to add slow-mo, especially in a fight. So, we've come to the end of the video, but if you want to give us a like, give us a follow, please do so. And also, if you're daring enough, just add a comment down below in terms of what would make you want to actually replay Sifu. Maybe it's the new features, maybe it's to challenge yourself again, but whatever it is, we want to hear it. Until next time, we out.